Welcome everyone to Dead Talk Live. Tonight our special guest is Leah Lederman, writer, editor. Leah, how you doing?
Perfect. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for being our guest. And let's get right to it. Okay. Now, what I usually do, of course, it's kind of hard not to with my usual array of guests and not knowing their work. I sort of came into this interview. Of course, I've got my research department and they do a lot of work and I have my notes. But I wanted to come into this sort of with a blank slate. I know you are the editor of Cafè Macabre. And I
Mhm.
know that it's a collection of short stories that's in a novel. And correct me if I'm wrong, they were all written by women?
That's correct. Yep.
Okay, great. So tell us about Café Macabre. Now, there's a second book too, Café Macabre 2, correct?
Yeah, I didn't get real creative with that title.
Now, you are the editor, and it's a collection of stories from different women. Now, the women who submit these stories, are they published editors? How do you go about the criteria of picking these women out?
That's a really good question because it kind of formed the basis of this whole collection. Both of them. It's yeah, they're short stories and artwork by women. Because each short story was accompanied by a piece of artwork, which was kind of cool. Also by female artists. So what I did was because I had access to so many horror authors through my editing, I just had this thought of like, I really need to get these voices together because this is so good. What I
Yeah.
have in my computer, these women from different parts of the country, and I wanted to get them together. So initially, I had Casey Pierce, Stephanie Menard, and two other gals who were all horror authors, and I liked what they had going on. But I also had this thought because I hate coming onto a horror show and admitting that I am not a horror aficionado by any means.
Oh,
I just,
let me tell you, I have
yeah.
interviewed actors, actresses, even
Okay.
filmmakers who are not aficionados, so don't worry
I
about
feel
that.
better. Okay. Because yeah, I'm a word of mouth editor. So, one horror author, then another, then another. So I went kind of back to my roots where I just knew some women who were writers. And I said, hey, I have an idea. I want you to write me some horror. And I liked that because it went beyond, your usual tropes of
Hmm.
horror, the trappings. They didn't know the rules. They were just writing about what frightened them. And then, in all honesty, I didn't really have a submission process. This was all by invitation. Um, and some of the women, just a few, I threw in, kind of sprinkled in, weren't even necessarily writers. They were women I knew who were very creative, very
Hmm.
strong. And I'm an editor, I'm a writing instructor. I figured I can pull it out of you if I have to. And turns out I didn't have to. It was like these women were just like waiting to spill onto the page. So some are horror authors, some are just writers, and some were just strong personalities and with a lot of creative energy that I wanted to tap into.
Now, you sort of touched on this a little bit. You had all these stories on your computer. When the idea for the book came to you, did you have enough material to publish the book? Or did you have just enough stories and put the word out there and say, hey, I need stories. I'm putting a book together. How did that come about?
Yeah, that's I emailed, I don't know how many people I originally emailed, but I would say just shy of 20 people. And I said, "Hey, I'm going to put this book together. What do you think?" And some of them they were largely positive, but then as it kind of, when it got real, some of them weren't able to for whatever reason or just said they couldn't. So it ended up dwindling down to, oh my gosh, I it's confusing because there's some people wrote more than one story,
Uh huh.
but so I'm trying to think of the actual number. There's a total of 20 women, artists and writers, in this first book here. Um, So yeah, I'd say I don't know what statistic that
Well,
is.
you don't need the exact number, but like in Café Macabre, the first book, it looks like there's a lot of stories in there. Approximately how many stories are in the first book?
There are 14, 2, 4, 6,
Wow.
8, 10, 12. Excuse, I know I should know this. It's 13 in the first one and 14 in the second one because I start getting them mixed up. So, yeah, there's 13 in this one, which is kind of, on purpose. This one, it started off with 13 and ended up having one added to it as a result of the Kickstarter. So,
Awesome.
yeah, no, that was really exciting. The whole thing has been.
So, how did the title Café Macabre come to you?
That's another. It was a working title. I was like, I don't know, it's just kind of like a female horror anthology, and because I had kind of mentioned, these stories that were in my inbox and on my computer, I just had this idea of, these voices coming
Hmm.
together and talking to each other. So I was like, it's like in a coffee house, Cafe Macabre.
Yeah.
And so that was just kind of my working title until somebody said, that's a really good title. I just hadn't really thought of it that way. And then, of
It is a
course,
great title.
thank you. I just think it's funny because for me, it was like just like, oh, this silly thing. Oh, Cafe Macabre. Like it hadn't occurred to me that that was actually a really good name. So now I'm happy, and it was so good that I didn't improve on it in the least for the second collection.
Now, let me ask you this. Now, you're the editor, you put all these stories together. Did you also publish it or did you find a publisher? How did that process work?
Well, that was kind of one of those like follow me, ye women. We're just gonna pile forward and do this. And they trusted me, and I think I had gone into the first one fully prepared to just self-publish. And as it happened, the Kickstarter was wildly successful, and we were picked up by Source Point Press, which is really exciting because they are huge, especially at least in horror and
Yeah.
comics and things of interest. So they published the first volume. When it came to the second volume, it had just become clear that they were more of a comics publishing house than prose. And like it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't like a hard feelings kind of thing. It was just like they're used to doing a run of comics, which costs, what per comic. And then I've got this 200-page book,
Yeah.
and they're like, we can't do this. They didn't say any of that. They were very kind, but I got the drift.
So
So,
you got like a total of 27 stories.
mhm.
As you read these stories, um, are you looking at a particular story and you're like, wow, this is so good? It has the potential of becoming a film or a television show if it's turned into a screenplay.
In all honesty, I don't really look at things that way. It's just
Mm-hmm.
not really my wheelhouse. I Yeah, I'm a big reader, so
Yeah.
I'm really into it for the words and how they work on the page. Having said that, there are a few that I think like, oh, this could be really cool. Can really see the cinematic quality of this, and I've even said that to my writers, like
Yeah.
this is something, it plays itself in your brain. But again, to me as a writer
It's
and
about the
editor,
words jumping out of the page.
I love the words. I like to see how they hit, how they line up, and how they take me away. So I don't think in the screenwriter sort of thing. It's on my list to take a screenwriting class and do that, but for now, I was very interested in seeing the sentences.
Now I'm going to put you in a really difficult spot with this next question. Out of those 27 stories, all right,
Mhm.
if someone, let's say you walked up to someone and you really want them to get hooked on this book, which of
Mhm.
those 27 stories would you recommend they read? and just one person, and you want to
Hmm.
get them hooked on and get these two books, and you have to
Hmm.
pick one out of 27 stories. Which one would you pick? What's the title of it? I
I'm
know I
thinking
put you on the spot.
I'm laughing. I'm thinking of Vicini from Princess Bride, where I'm like, I clearly cannot choose my own story.
I love
Am I
that
a
movie.
different person? So I'm taking my own stories off of the map.
Okay.
Um, here's the caveat. There is a fan favorite, which has showed up in multiple reviews, and that is my good friend Carrie McElroy's story Steps in the first volume.
Okay.
Um, I think, though, that this poet turned prose author, Michelle Joy Gallagher sorry, Michelle. She knows. Anyway. Um, it's got some British pronunciation. Anyway, I think her story, Red Woman, it it just kind of blew me out of the water. It's got a really nice mixture, a little bit of history.
Mm-hmm.
It's got some gore. It was one of the gouged eyeballs. There were two separate gouged eyeballs, independent of each other, and
Wow.
one in each volume. Just random fact. Um, but I really liked, it had that a perfect amount of gore, history, storytelling, um, ghosty, resurrection-y kind of stuff. It
Awesome.
was, I think it was so well layered that it at least it's one of my favorites, and I think it is representative of the kind of thing I was after.
Nice. Now, I'm a big reader, not a big writer. I'm not a writer at all. I'm not a professional writer. Gore is something that plays well on the screen. When it comes to, like you said earlier, the words jumping out at you from a page, I would think it's all about the character building, the psychological thriller that really keeps you on the edge of your seat, that terrifies you. Now, when we're looking at the stories in both these volumes, you mentioned there is a fair amount of gore, but in your opinion, how does the gore, for you, how do they jump off the page for you when it comes to the gore parts of these stories?
Well, okay. One thing is, I think there's actually not a ton of gore in these stories. There was just a few choice moments, and Michelle really nailed it. But so when there is, it's in one situation, it's because you kind of know something bad's going to happen, but you're not really sure what. And
Mm-hmm.
then this eyeball comes flying, and you're like, "Oh shit, are you kidding?" And it comes out very creatively. So it was definitely like at, at one point in the editing process, we were discussing like the physics of it. Like, what would the trajectory be? Would the implement be tensile enough? We were really getting into this. So, so there was that. It was just such a like you knew something bad was going to happen. You didn't know what. Other moments, it's been it's hard to do a gotcha like that in
Yeah.
writing, which is why I think Michelle is so phenomenal because
Mm-hmm.
she is able to do it. But it's slower in writing. So she did a gotcha moment, but with this, it's kind of like we're going to lead you into this and you can hear the violins playing. You know something creepy is going to go on, but what's it going to be? And it was again, not as much gore. There were a few big moments, but it's like gross. There's a lot of gross,
Mm-hmm.
a lot more of that. So,
How many?
in
Oh, go on.
yeah, I was trying to think of other gore moments, but it's just slower. It just takes place on the page slower, which in some ways is I don't want to say more uncomfortable, but it's its own kind of discomfort because you're like I don't want to be reading this. This is really I
Well,
don't want to see what's going to happen.
that's why books are it's two different mediums whether it comes to television, film, and books. In books, you're allowed to build what would be the cinematography in your brain. You're
Hmm.
allowed to build the scene based off the words that you're reading, and that's why it's a beautiful thing. How many of those stories were actually written by yourself?
There are three in the first volume and two in the second.
Now, when you were working with these women, was it a collaboration to where they would write and halfway through a story they may hit some writer's block and they would come to you for advice, or they would write something and ask for your opinion and you would give your feedback? Was it a collaborative effort?
It definitely was more so with some writers. I mean, I needed it, frankly. So I was one of them, was like, I don't know how to finish this. um, some people said, like, I've already got this story here, check it out. And so I would give them just notes and feedback, but it was already there. That was
Hmm.
just, tremendous. um, but there were definitely others where there was back and forth, especially in the first one, not as much in the second. The whole idea with my cafe was I even wanted us as writers to work together a little bit.
Hmm.
So, and also I'm a writing teacher. I had a peer review and quite, I quite literally had like a sheet of like just 4 or 5 questions. Like, here, would you read each other's work and give feedback? And it was so dorky, but it was really cool because we
Yeah,
really did workshop. I shouldn't say peer review. I should say workshop.
yeah,
We told each other like, this really works. This wasn't as strong. Here's my questions. Um, because as the editor, I wanted to make sure that it wasn't just my voice coming through, because then it would just be Cafe Leah. And as wonderful as that sounds to me, I don't know if I quite have the following for that. So, yeah, some of them were much more collaborative. In the second volume, it was definitely a lot of back and forth between myself and writers. My stories going the other way. Like I had to send it to Michelle, send it to my sister, and kind of say like, "Hey, how's this working?" So yeah, some of the stories took more drafts, but it was definitely a sense of arriving. I want to think, although I don't want to ask, I would like to think that it was a a rewarding process
yeah,
for each writer.
yeah.
Like this is not me just writing you because you're not writing the story I want you to. This is me keeping at it because I think the story is not where it could be.
Okay.
So that was kind of where I was at with it. I wanted it to be clearly your story,
Yeah.
but I'm gonna tell you, hey, maybe try this little tweak over here, that kind of thing.
What was the biggest takeaway that you got from volume two that you learned when you put from volume one when you put volume two together?
Oh, wow, that's a good question. Well, I learned how to do it faster. I'd say like, don't do the peer reviews, things like that, or don't have a baby while you're in the middle of trying to put a book together. These were some lessons because I was like, wow, Cappy Macabre 2 went so much faster. um, so there was, those kinds of things. I think I had grown a lot as a writer as well and as an editor. So there was a lot. It was like the process of Cafe Macabre is what made Cafe Macabre 2 a lot easier. I just knew better the process.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I knew, I'm trying, that's a really good question. No one's ever quite posed it like that. I think I was a lot more confident.
Okay.
Have, Having, I mean, just like I said, I knew the process more and all that, but that whole thing I just talked about of guiding the writers to where I thought the story could be, in the potential. I think I held back a lot more in Cafe Macabre, and we arrived there, but it was a much more
What, in volume
circuitous.
one or volume two?
In volume one, it took longer because I did not have the confidence to say, I really think that we could do this and this. Whereas in the second volume, I was just much more,
Hands on.
yeah, hands on. That's so much better than I was going to say, like commandeering.
Yeah. Yeah.
But no, I felt much more confident to get in the dirt with them.
Yeah. The really bad word would be controlling.
I was trying not to say that one too. Yeah. But I mean, again, like, I don't know if they would ever just tell me I was, because they were all pretty nice. We all had a nice time working together and enjoyed each other. But I hope no one felt that way. And
I'm
ladies, if
sure.
you did, sorry.
I'm sure everything is fine. The end product is it's what matters in the long run. Now you've been doing you've been attending some horror conventions. Is that true?
Comic conventions, some more horror than others. I did take this beautiful piece of work to Cherry Capital Comic Con in Traverse City for its debut. It had a Halloween debut, and I got to meet so many people that I've known only online for so long, people that I've worked with even. So that was really cool. And I've been to Indie Comic Con, um, and I plan on going to some others kind of in the area around here, vaguely Midwest. I'm a little limited by travel. But we've got readings scheduled around here in Indianapolis and things like that. So
Now, when you came out with these books and you started doing the conventions, was that your introduction to any kind of convention?
not really, no. Again, through my editing work, I worked with a lot of comic artists and writers. So I used to go to Indie Comic Con and hang out. I have worked with Dirk Manning for over 10 years. So I'd go and I met Casey Pierce at one of these Comic Cons. She was one of the first people that I asked. I met Stephanie Menard, so I met a lot of these women at these Comic Cons and knew them as comic authors. So yeah, I was familiar. I was familiar with it more or less.
It's a great place to network, meet people that have similar interests to you. It really is a great place. And beyond just going there and having fun with the vendors and seeing all the costumes and listening to the guests, it's a great place to socialize, network, and meet other people who share the same passion as you do. How was the reception to the books at the convention? Was it better than you expected? Underwhelming?
Okay. The when I went to Indie Comic Con, I was there with Carrie McElroy, and she is a really fantastic writer, and she has a graphic novel series, a web comic called Regarding Dandelions, and she's a better writer than me, so I actually hate her. But we tabled together, and it was kind of amazing to me. I have these books set up, and how many people would just kind of stop in their tracks. They would be walking along, and they would see it, and they would stop, and they would come over, and maybe even if they didn't come over, they would slow down and they would look at it.
Mm-hmm.
And that is because the cover art here is by Kaylin Smith, who does For Goodness Sake and Hope, among others, and Plume. And then this one is here by Emily Zelasco.
I really love that cover.
She is so incredible. When I asked her to do the cover, like it was one of those things where like I sent the email and then just like tried not to sit at my computer all day. Like, and then, when I saw the response, like I didn't want to click on it right away. I had to like, and she did. And it's actually, there's like a weird little aside, a personal note on the cover. If you look at it closely, which you won't be able to here, obviously, but it's a forest, there's a skeleton, and each of the books, every item on the cover is from one of the stories. I have
Uh-huh.
the women pick out an emblem from their story. But she's got this little forest with a tea party, and there's doilies on the trees.
Wow.
And I crap you not. That's like so. I don't know. Anyway,
It's a Midwest thing.
I know. I've never said I crap you not before. My mom literally does that. She takes like teacups and doilies and puts them on old dead trees and takes pictures of them. And Emily didn't know this, but she did it, and it was like, oh my gosh. So it was like just beyond satisfying to see how perfectly, we've hit the nail on the head. So it was really exciting.
Now, moving forward, do you think there's going to be a volume three somewhere down the line?
Um, well, the reason the second one happened is because before the first one had even gone to Kickstarter, two people had asked me if I was doing a second one. And I, at that time, was kind of like, no, don't even, no, you know. And then another gal, Lila, Allison Spooner, who's in Café Macabre too, I respect so much. And I was like, oh man, she wants to work on this. Oh man. And then Lila Musselman, she's a like multiple pushcart nominee, you know, like, oh my gosh, how can I say no? So I did it.
Yeah.
I twisted my arm. Now with the third one, potential one, I haven't heard anything. I haven't heard much, so like I'm kind of like, well, no one's biting just yet. Um, I
When
have
was the second one released?
it just dropped October
Oh,
31st.
okay.
It
So
just it's
it's just a
brand new.
couple of weeks, brand new. Okay.
Mhm. One writer artist that I know, he said, "Oh, you got to go for the hat trick." Um, and I'm not quite so sure yet. I do feel like I said I'm so much more confident now that I could whip a bad boy out in a year, but it's a lot of work
Oh
to
yeah, I can imagine. I
put it
mean,
all together.
I can
And
imagine. Would you consider for volume three doing something a little different than you did in volume one or volume two?
that was something I had considered was, well, like, what if I didn't do horror? What if I chose a different genre? Or what if I chose a theme? I thought about that kind of a thing. And, I just, at this point, I'm like, I'm not ruling anything out, but I'm also very much not committing to anything, especially not on a recorded interview.
So so when it comes to the stories, you said there was three of them that you wrote. What was your inspiration? You said you're not a horror fan. So what did you use for inspiration to put your stories together? What?
Well, yeah, well, it's not that not a horror fan. It's that I'm a huge scaredy cat. Like
Yes,
there's,
yes.
I,
I'm
I don't.
married to one. I know.
Okay. Like when we had a washer and dryer in the basement, I did not do laundry after dark. Like that's how I am.
Hmm.
Um, so I had the first story was already kind of written in my head because when we moved into this house, I absolutely felt something run by me that wasn't there. And I was editing, of course. I was laying on the floor, scrawling away, and I looked up at my cat. I looked in the direction where like the trajectory of the wind had gone. There was nothing there. I looked back over at my cat, and her eyes were like, bing. And that terrified me. And still in that same area, there's a photo frame that always gets knocked over. Um,
So
so that
all the
was,
elements were there just to creep the crap out of you.
yeah, so there was that. And I focused on that for my first story, which is just, it's flash fiction. It opens the whole book. And I just kind of turned, and here's like one of the things, like the themes, these books, it's what women fear and how they write about it.
Hmm.
We have houses, our houses are haunted, okay, but this house was trying to protect the woman. And so, there's just kind of different spins on things,
Yeah.
like different women, we come at it a little bit differently.
Hmm.
And so, but then there's more because in my backyard there is a bed of daffodils that I shit you not, I'll say it there.
There you go.
It, it's a bed of daffodils. It's in the shape of a coffin. And my husband, he came to me and was like, "Did you see that bed of daffodils?" And I was like, "I know." So that became the
That was
impetus.
like that when you got the house?
Hmm.
Oh boy.
Plus, I had the weird, creepy wind thing
Hmm.
frame. And then there's one last layer to this, which is when we talk to our neighbor down the street. And this is like quite literally a conversation in one of the stories. I'm talking to the neighbor. I'm like, oh yeah, I think there were kids there because you can see the outline of like a letter on the door, like you
Hmm.
would put on a kid's room.
Hmm.
She said, I've lived here since those houses went up, and I have never seen a child at that house. That's true.
God.
Oh my God.
You know, that's what freaks me out the most. And, probably I hate moving to begin with, but if I were to ever buy another house, I would hire a private investigator to do a complete
Yeah.
background check on it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, no. My family basically was like, you need to go into every single room and like consecrate it with the Bible.
Exactly, exactly.
I get it. I get it. So, there was that the house itself came up that gave me two separate stories in the two different books.
Hmm.
There, speaking of how women take things differently, one of my stories was absolutely an interpretation of a time in my life when I had kind of like I had stepped out of the box
Hmm.
that was allowed for me. And so it's like not that women are punished or what have you, but like there are consequences for it. And there's a lot of restraint in these stories where you see here's women in a typical female convention and we're really straining against it. Like that thing
Hmm.
becomes the horror. It's the monster we can kill. It's the thing that makes us go crazy. So that's what happens in these stories. And so the story I wrote was about, when I was 17 and I knew everything. And, I bad things happen, and
Exactly.
I turned it into this horror story. But here's something okay that I learned after Café Macabre. The first was even though I had written fiction before, I had never realized how much fiction is nonfiction. And I think that that is also something I'm aware of because I am writing a lot of nonfiction now. So it's kind of like, well, wait a second. I'm trying to write about this moment in my life, but it's all here in this story that I
Yeah.
wrote for a horror collection. So that's been really interesting to see how many of my writers are like, I'm actually writing about this person that I knew, or I'm writing about this thing that happened to me. And I think a lot of horror authors and fiction authors would say the same, but I just find that endlessly fascinating. Just how we take our own experiences and like just wring them dry and hack them with knives and do these horrible things.
Some of the best writing, some of the best creative works is a blend, and it's a
Yeah.
hazy blend of fiction
Mhm.
and nonfiction blended together. Uh, Before we go, I want to ask you. So, I mean, you've been a writer your whole life. When did this passion in you start? Was it like as far back as you can remember? Was it a certain point in your life?
Yeah, like I have a long answer. I'll try to give you the short answer. First, before my memory, apparently, I started writing my autobiography. My dad would always say, like, age 4, the poet. Like, I don't know if that's true. I don't remember. But I did. I always journaled in high school, yada, yada. Having kind of gotten back in touch with a few friends from high school, they have more than one has told me independently of each other, "Well, you were always a writer." So, and I'm kind of seeing that now. Like, I just avoided it for a long time. I thought, well, I can get a job and a degree that will actually make me money and then write on the side,
Mm-hmm.
which some people are able to do. I was not. I ended up getting a degree in English literature. um, and I just ran in circles around writing. I taught writing, I edited other people's writing, and then finally it was in 2015 where I said, "Okay, no, I am going to do this."
Mm-hmm.
It took me 5 years to say comfortably to someone, "Hey, I'm an editor," and then my goal is in another 5 years, I want to be comfortable saying I'm a writer. And as it happens, on Halloween of 2019, is that right? Yes, 2019. I was in Muncie, Indiana at the release of Café Macabre, and I went to the bar next door because obviously, and I had the book with me, and the bartender said, "Hey, are you a writer?" And I was like, "Yes, I am." And so it worked. I did. I had to finally say, you have to focus on just this. If you try to do all these other things, it's not going to happen. So yeah, it took a long time to get here, but now I have I have my hands everywhere when it comes to writing. I work for two different writers centers. I edit for several different people of all different genres and mediums.
Do you want to
And
continue teaching as well?
I I I started the editing because I was leaving teaching.
Okay.
Because when 2/3 of your paycheck is going to go to daycare, you might as well just stay home. But
Exactly.
I did not want to have the mom gap on my resume. And
Yeah.
so that was six years ago. And yeah, I'd say in 6 years I feel pretty good about what I've done. I've got three books out and
That's
I'm
awesome.
working on more, and I don't plan on giving this up anytime soon. Like, you can't say you're a writer and then say, I used to be a writer. Like, have you ever heard someone say,
No.
I used to be a
No.
writer?
No.
That's just not what
It's
happens. So,
something that's part of your being, your fiber. It doesn't go away. So
yeah.
so tell our audience
Mm.
where they can get Cafe Macabre and Cafe Macabre Volume Two.
Sure, yeah. Well, Café Macabre, the first, is available on Amazon, ebook and print. You can get it at my website, which is such a horrible mouthful. I'm so sorry. It's leahmcnaughtonletterman.com. So good luck spelling that. But if you just Google Leah Lederman, I will pop up.
See
I'm
what
so
she
sorry.
does.
It was just one of those like things, mistakes you make. As of right now, Café Macabre 2 is only available on Amazon as an ebook. But if you want the beautiful, wonderful print edition with, I will tell you, all kinds of, let me find where's my favorite
Me
one?
personally, I prefer actual paper as opposed to
Yeah,
ebooks.
yeah. And then here is because you can really get a good
Yeah.
at this
Wow.
beautiful artwork. And there's one of these bad boys for every single story that's in here. So it's a very layered book, and there's 20 women in the first, 26 in the second, and because there are some repeats in there, total combined is the work of 36 separate women from across the country.
Now I gotta ask you, the artwork that you said there's at least one for every story. Uh, was that somebody separate who wrote the
Yes,
story that was brought in to do the art for that story?
that's correct. With a few exceptions of those bitches who can do it all. You know who you are. You know I hate you. There's a couple of them, and they're the ones who threw off the count for me because it's like, wait, now it's not 13 and 13 anyway. It's a whole thing, so they screwed it all up. But yes, I had my eye on several female artists that I know from the Comic Con circuits.
Yeah.
I knew their work. Other people I just stalked relentlessly on their web pages and things like that. There were some suggestions like, hey, I know this person, yada yada. But yeah, with those few exceptions, every story is accompanied by a piece of art by a separate female artist.
That's awesome. That is, I'm gonna pick him up. I'm gonna read him. Of course, I'm a huge fan of horror. I'm gonna pick them up. I'm gonna read them,
Great.
and I'll be like emailing you back and forth as I read each story, probably.
Yes,
So,
please do. I love to talk about things about me and things that I've done.
so the books are called Cafe Macabre and Cafe Macabre Volume Two. You can pick them up on Amazon. Check them out. Sounds really fascinating. Leah, thank you so much for being our guest. Any
Thank you.
final thoughts you want to share before we go?
I just got to say, if you want to write, you need to be writing. And no matter what you want to do, you need to be reading.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. Thank you to Leah. Thank you to our audience for tuning in tonight. Until next time, on behalf of Leah Lederman and myself, stay safe, stay walking. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.